The problem is determine which diagnostic test type generates the highest average revenue per appointment. The select specifies the columns you want to retrieve from the database. In this case, I selecting diagnosis ID, the unique identifier of each diagnosis, DT diagnosis name, the name of each diagnosis, AVG at revenue, ES average revenue, the average revenues generated by each diagnosis calculated by averaging the revenue column from the appointments test table, the AS average revenue part assigned as alias the calculated average for this year. Readability. From this clause, specific tables from which you want to retrieve data. Here we're selecting data from the diagnosis table alias as DT. Join. This clause joins diagnosis table with the appointment test table. The condition specifies how tables are related by matching the diagnosis ID from the diagnosis table, the test from the appointment test table. This allows us to access revenue information from the appointment test table for each diagnosis. The group by. This clause groups of resulted by specific columns, DT the diagnosis ID and DT diagnosis name. This ensures that the AVG revenue calculation is performed each distinct diagnosis. The ordered by. This clause sorts of the results by average revenue column in descending order so that the diagnosis with the highest average revenue will be at the top. The limit 1. This clause limit as the result to set only the first row, which represents the diagnosis with the highest average revenue. The create view statement creates new virtual called average revenue per test. Select, deselect, identical to the select clause in the previous SQL code, specifying the columns to be included in the view. From join group by, these clauses are also identical to the previous SQL code, defining the data source, the joining condition, and the grouping criteria. The stored procedure delimiter. This line sets the delimiter for the stored procedure This is necessary because the standard delimiter is used within the procedure itself. Create procedure, get the highest average revenue test. This line declares the creation of a stored procedure named get the highest average revenue test. Begin. This keyword marks the beginning of the procedure code block. Select. This clause specific the columns to retrieve from the database. DT diagnosis ID, the unique identifier for each diagnosis. DT diagnosis name, the name of each diagnosis. The AVG revenue as ES average revenue. The average revenue generated by each diagnosis calculated by averaging revenue column from the appointment test table. From this clause specific tables from which is retrieved data. Here we're selecting data from the diagnosis table. Join. This clause joins the diagnosis table with the appointment test table. The ON condition specifies the tables are related by matching diagnosis ID from the diagnosis table with the test ID from the appointment test table. This allows us to access revenue information from the appointment test table for each diagnosis. The group by. This clause groups results in specified columns, DT diagnosis ID and DT diagnosis name. This ensures that the AVG at revenue calculation is performed for each distinct diagnosis. The ordered by. This clause sorts the results by the average revenue column in descending order, so its diagnosis with the highest average revenue will be at the top. The limit 1. As this clause limits the results set to only first row, which represents the diagnosis with the highest average revenue. The end. This is the keyword marks to the end of procedure code block, and delimiter. This is the line resets the delimiter back to the standard.